Okay, listeners, welcome back to our third episode of Time for Forgiveness. My name is Robert Pascuzzi. I'm joined, of course, with Father Don Farnan and Kelly, my beautiful wife, Kelly. So welcome, and we're very excited about today's episode. Before we introduce Tracey Brasher, our guest, Father, do you want to kind of read out our mission statement?
Certainly, yes. Not reading it, just talking off the top of my head. But
Right.
I think that our mission in general is just to bring a message of forgiveness into homes and to recognize that every single human person deals with aspects of life and difficulties of life. And our conversation here is really just an impetus for conversations in homes across the listening audience and for people to deal with their own issues in the way that we're talking them out and be able to recognize our human condition, what psychology calls or the church calls original sin, but it's who we are, the mistakes that we make along the way, and the calls that we have, just as Jesus fell with his cross, to get back up and to keep moving on and never lose sight of our destiny and our goal and our union with the divine. So it's great to have these conversations and encourage others to have conversations as well.
Amen, amen. And today we have, again, Tracey Brasher. Tracey is a lifelong Catholic, a wife, mother of two boys, and she is also a new Grammy to her new grandson. And through the painful journey of the unthinkable sin of infidelity, Tracey has been forgiven and redeemed through the power of Christ because of the forgiveness and healing that she has received. Her passion now is to share the possibilities of forgiveness and restoration of marriage and family. So Tracey, welcome, and we're really excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate.
Absolutely. Well, perhaps we would just start with a little background, if you might want to take a few minutes and share with the audience, your story and how we got to this point, and then we'll kind of, take it from there.
All right. Well, I think it starts as a little bit of my bio that just, I grew up as a lifelong Catholic, grew up in the Catholic Church with wonderful family, great parents who raised us in the Catholic Church and was an example of marriage and family. So I grew up in that atmosphere. Just that was what I witnessed, that, people were married, you got married, you had kids, you had a family, you went to church, and, life was good. And then I believe that, I'm also a big believer that, God creates the ultimate spouse for us, the person that he creates for us to spend our life with. And I was very fortunate to have met my husband, Chris, and kind of in the way that that it was God ordained, because I grew up in Kansas City and he grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and had gotten transferred back in the early 90s to Kansas City for a job. And we had met through our work situation. And I just knew, I can still remember the day when he walked in and I saw him, and there was kind of just a leap in my heart, or a feeling that, wow, that guy is really someone special. And so I knew it from the moment that I met him. And so moving on from then, we got introduced and started dating, and then ultimately got married. I think the one thing looking back now is Chris, he didn't grow up in a family of faith, and also grew up in a family of divorce. And it was a very hard divorce for him and his family, in the sense that it was his parents till even through to now never really healed or really had a good relationship with each other, or were an example for Chris as what a marriage, a husband, a father could and should be. So I think us coming together as I look back now, I really believe God brought us together because of my faith and his lack of faith, in the sense that we needed each other. So ultimately, we ended up getting married, and we did go through the Catholic Church to get married. Chris agreed to go through the classes and participate and to support me in getting married in the Catholic Church. He did not become Catholic at the time, but went through all the classes with me, and we had a beautiful marriage. And, you know, in that moment, I think like everybody who first gets married, this is like my Cinderella story, you know, going to be married forever, and it's just going to be wonderful. But then, you know, life steps in. And so being first married, we were one of those lucky, blessed couples that basically got pregnant on our honeymoon, which was a shock for me, because you're thinking, oh my gosh, I just got married to this man and I'm not even used to living with him. And now I'm bringing a baby into the world. But what I realized after my first son was born was that it was a true blessing, and that I needed that at the time. And so it was just a wonderful gift for me to, I think, kind of slow down and get into the presence of being a mother and truly understanding what love is. Because I think a lot of us are in this thought that when you marry someone and you love your spouse, and there's this excitement of this future together and this friendship. But ultimately, when I had my first child, that was when I think I really realized what love truly is. Just like the power of love, the feeling of love, of creating this child with my spouse. And I know we talk about, you know, loving our spouse more than our children, and loving God more than our spouse. But I think in that moment, for me, it was just like, this is something that I created that was a gift from God. And so it all of a sudden really made me understand the feeling and the power of love. So proceeding into that, I think, you know, you fall into just life of being a mother, a spouse, and I was a working mother at the time, and, you know, was just very busy. And then, of course, we had a second child. And so again, a working mother, raising children, and a marriage, and trying to be perfect at all those things, trying to be the perfect mom, the perfect wife, the perfect employee. And then, you know, church on Sunday. Like, we go to church on Sunday because that's what we did as Catholics. So there was faith in our life, in the sense that we attended church every Sunday. But to say that Chris and I in our marriage had the presence of God and he was, you know, number one in our marriage, I would absolutely say no. And so moving forward into that, it was just kind of, you get in a routine, where it's kind of in a box where you place God in your faith, that it's something as a Catholic that I kind of do on Sunday. And of course, Chris didn't grow up in faith, so I was kind of the leader of faith also within our marriage. So not only was it being the mother, the spouse, the employee, also I'm the leader of faith in our home. So I think there was just in my mind, but I wasn't really connected to God in the way that I needed to be, that I knew he was my father and he was with me all the time. It was more of just a box, kind of, I feel like I checked back in those days. So ultimately, we got into a place where Chris had lost his job and kind of went into a depression. And so again, here it's me trying to hold all of these balls up in the air and trying to be perfect at everything that I was doing, but yet not really relying on God at that time in an intimate way, that I knew he was my helper and that he was always going to be there for me. So needless to say, through all of that going on, I think I felt alone because I was all this to all these people, but there was nobody really feeding into me. So you start to get into what I feel like we do more in society today is, okay, well, it's me. Like I'm kind of bitter. Like I'm here doing all of this and nobody's here to say, I got you or I appreciate you or, this, and this. So you start to look for ways that you can find that affirmation that you are all of these things that no one else is telling you or you're not feeling in that moment. And so that led to me ended up having an extramarital affair. And, I've had conversations with several people about how it happened or why it happened, because especially for me as a Catholic and seeing that my parents were married forever and still are today, that I never envisioned myself, first of all, ever having an affair or ever getting a divorce. It just didn't, that wasn't the way I was raised. But in that moment when you feel the darkness and the loneliness and just like, am I enough? And somebody starts to pay just a little of attention to you in a way where you're feeling appreciative and you're feeling attractive or you're feeling smart or you're feeling all the things that you wish you were receiving from your spouse. And so ultimately I started out with a friendship with someone, and then it ended up becoming a sexual relationship into where, it became an affair that went on for, I'm very sad to say, as I look back, a couple years, and it ultimately ended up, breaking up my marriage for a period of time. And then when I finally did come to the realization of, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I realized that this wasn't the path that God had for me. And I know, Father, and I probably had people share this with you before, but there were so many times throughout the affair that was going on for years. And, there's a period of time where no one knew. And then, of course, people find out. But I can remember so many times feeling the presence of God, like fighting for my soul at that time. But in a moment, you could also feel the other side. Like there's this pull where you're, it's almost like you feel Satan, but you feel the presence of God saying, I'm still here. And when you're ready, I'm here. And it was never, it's sad because I go back and I can remember the moments of sitting there in the quietness with just myself. And I think that's the other shame of today, is that we don't sometimes just sit with ourselves in our own sin or the shamefulness that we do feel for what we've created. But it was so crazy in that moment when I was like, oh my God, I totally feel the pull. And I know where I'm supposed to go, but there's so much shame in what I did. And I had made that choice, and it was like, I'm almost at a place where I guess I have to live with that. I can't go back. How do I do that? And there was just this pull for so much of, I feel like what was my soul saying, no, you're going to be here someday. And I'm here just quietly. I'm here. So I always felt that pull of, you're not where I placed you. You're not where you're supposed to be. This isn't the road I want you to go on. So when I finally came to that realization of it's a place where you're just like, I made some really bad choices, and why did I make those choices? And you're putting the blame on, I feel like, other people within your life, instead of just getting quiet and one with God about, who am I? Why am I doing this? And So once I did do that, and realized that I needed to make this right, and I needed to try to put my family back together, I remember, coming to my husband, who was my ex-husband at the time. We had been divorced. We had been divorced for probably a year, legally divorced. And let's say we were separated for probably a period of 3 years. We kind of went back and forth, but finally legally got divorced. And we had been divorced for about a year, living in separate houses. And I remember saying to him, he came over to drop the kids off, and we were standing outside, and I still remember saying to him, I'm sorry for what I've done, and I have to put our family back together. And I remember in that moment that he looked at me and he said, I'd rather be dead than married to you. And basically turned and walked away. And so that was the moment where I said, okay, this is what you want me to do. So I'm here. But he does, in that moment, in the physical, you're like, but he doesn't want it. So what do I do now? And that night I went to adoration, and I sat in the chapel, by myself, just in a sense, quietly just crying out to God, saying, I don't know what to do, but you asked me to be here. So, please just give me a sign that this is what you want me to do. And if it is, I will fight for this. And so I think, as I know, I've heard your last podcast with Bob and Kelly, and one of the things that they talk about is that sometimes God sends you someone, I feel like, as a sign or a connection that he actually does hear you. Because in that moment, I'm like, do you hear me, God? Do you hear me calling out to you? Because I can't do this by myself. And so the next day, I received a phone call from somebody who I had been communicating with in a work situation. And we were just having a conversation. And at the end of the conversation, he just said, I need to share something with you. And I said, okay. And he said, God asked me to share a message with you. And I remember thinking, okay. And he said, I hear you praying. I heard you praying. He goes, you were in a chapel last night praying to God and asking him for help. And he wants you to know that he's there. He's there beside you, and you will reconcile with your husband. And I, in that moment, just felt this inner peace, this peace of, he actually hears me, like he heard me. He actually heard my cry, and he's there for me. So now I just have to step forward, and he will lead me. And it was a very long journey. Chris and I did reconcile and remarry, but it was we were divorced for over 12 years, and before we remarried, and now we are remarried, and I feel like more connected and have a better marriage than we had before. All of the sin and the lies and everything occurred. So I do believe that there's healing, but I think in my process, and I've spoken to Kelly about this before, I feel like even today, there are times where you still live in the pain and the guilt and the hurt that you've caused the person, Chris and my children and my family, everybody who had to go through the divorce and the reconciliation and all the hurt. And so I think one of the hardest things for most people is knowing that they've truly been forgiven for the sin. And I think sometimes within our church, it's you don't feel like you've been forgiven. And so for me, it's kind of been that journey of the Lord loves me. And the minute I asked for his forgiveness, he gave it to me. And I no longer have to feel guilty about the pain and the hurt that I caused my husband and my children. But yet, it's still to this day, feelings, things come up in that moment where I'm like, I actually did that. I caused that pain to that person. And so it's sometimes hard to forgive yourself for the guilt of hurting people who you love so much. And I don't know that I ever really felt that when I confessed it, because I did go to confession and I did confess my sin. But wanting to feel like that, God is my Father, and he knew what I was going to do before I even did it, and that he was going to use it for good at some point, even though it was such in my mind, a horrific act of betrayal that I created. And before I end, Father, one of the things I think for me was when I actually saw the movie where they have Jesus hanging on the cross and the two people next to him who are also being crucified with him. And when the gentleman looks over at him and realizes that, wow, you are the real deal. You are truly Jesus. And he says, I want to be with you. I felt like in that moment, it was so heartwarming to see Jesus turn to him and say, you will be, because you've asked. And I feel like sometimes within religion or within churches, you ask for forgiveness, but then there's this, well, you have to do this and this and this, and you might end up in purgatory, and you might end up here, and you might, if you're not doing all these penance. When in that moment, I just remember seeing Jesus look at him and say, then you shall be with me. And it wasn't, if you do this, if you've done that, if you do this, there wasn't any of that. It was such a feeling of, oh my God, my Father does love me if we truly ask for his forgiveness.
Tracey, your story is so beautiful, so powerful, and yet a story that so many of us can relate to on one level or another because of our own actions and because of our own decisions that we make in life. And I think the most powerful part of your story is the part of redemption and where you ended, which in many ways is a beginning spot, and that is understanding that you are forgiven, that God is with you. And even in those darkest moments, you realized, though you felt so alone, you could not be separated from God. And to get that sense that upon the cross and in the suffering that happens, that the one who is asking for forgiveness, that Jesus says, I assure you this very day, you'll be with me in paradise. He's also saying, you've never not been with me. I always want you close to me. And sometimes the church does get in the way of that, but you knew this at certain points along the way, that you were with God and God was with you. Life is such an incredible journey with so many ups and downs and peaks and valleys and twists and turns and the potholes and the curves that come around us. But we somehow keep moving forward. And I don't know what it was that was within you to keep you moving forward, but I'll just call it grace. And there was something that was happening when everything else was going against you. There is, and I would encourage our listeners, if they can take the time to do so, Psalm 139, the Psalms in the Hebrew Scriptures in the Old Testament, about partway through, we'll find them. They're sometimes called the wisdom literature. There are 150 Psalms, which is, by the way, where we get our 150 beads of the rosary, because the Psalms are looking at the joys and the sorrows and the glories of life. But Psalm 139 is essentially a psalm about our lives, that God knows what is in our hearts. He knows what we are trying to form to communicate out of our mouths before we even speak. That God knows us in our mother's womb, and that in life, sometimes we wander along this journey and we go in different directions, and yet in the directions that we go, we can never flee from his love. It says, if I climb to the highest mountains, you are there. If I go beyond the seas, or if I go to that place of Sheol, it says, that place of utter loneliness and of darkness, even there, you will be with me. And it's a beautiful prayer for us to reflect upon, and I think that it kind of captures what was happening in your life during this time. And it is an incredible challenge, but I just want to say that I'm so impressed and so inspired by your willingness to never give up, as so many people would, and so many of us have in certain ways. But you knew that there was something greater that was going on. Do you believe that you were not ever forsaken or abandoned? Do you get the sense that even though you were in an incredibly dark desert, facing all kinds of demons, did you get the sense that you were not alone because of God's presence? Or did you feel that because of society, or because of church, or because of condemnations and judgments, and you have to do this in order to get that, that there was something else going on? I think that, God is always wanting to remind us that we're a part of something far greater than ourselves. And I don't know to what degree we want to get into some different aspects of our conversation, but there are things about marriage that maybe would be of interest to our listeners. You had mentioned at the beginning that God has someone in mind for each one of us. And I think that's a wonderful concept. I hope that it's true. I think that it's true. I tell our confirmation kids, they're in middle school and early high school, I'll tell them, now start praying for your future spouse. You have no idea who it is, but I want you to start praying for this person now, because you'll be devoted to them in the future, and they'll be devoted to you. I know also that a lot of us, I think when I was in my 20s and people were getting married, and for many of my siblings, I think we often thought, well, I don't know if there's a special person that God has chosen out there, or if at the time that it's to marry, you take the person that you happen to be with, or the available person, and you presume that that's the one that God wants us with. I realize that we're getting off on a little bit different topic, but I don't know to what degree people want to talk about that idea of marriage and what it means, and what it means in the context of the church's view, as you said, Tracey, that the other person becomes the center of your life, just as when you have children, your first child becomes the center of your life. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, well, and Father, I agree with everything that you're saying. I always felt the presence of Jesus and God when I was going through the darkness. I always, like I said, knew like he was fighting for me and working through my spirit to continue to put Chris, my husband, and my family like in the forefront, in the sense that all this stuff that society and everybody says that it's just much easier if you move on, much easier if you make a different choice and just find the easier way. And what I always felt was, and I'm sure Bob and Kelly would like to share, because I think they have an amazing marriage and story. And I'm sure they would say the same thing. With Chris and I, looking back now in the moment, he was everything I prayed for. Like, he was everything I ever wanted in a husband. And our opposites, his weaknesses are definitely my strengths, and his strengths are definitely my weaknesses. And so when they talk about that, two people come together to become one, it's so true, because together as a couple, we are so much stronger than we were apart. And I still go back to the gentleman who reached out to me, and I believe that was definitely God trying to speak to me. And one of the things he said to me, which really also grabbed me, was he said, "You know what, Tracey, you and Chris can both try to go a different direction. You can find different people. You can do whatever it is you think in your mind is best for you. But ultimately, God has a plan for you, and you two will never be able to live without each other in a happy, blissful, like godly way, because you are meant to be together, and you can never not love each other." And I remember back in the day, people saying, "Oh, divorce is just so easy. You find somebody else, and you still like your husband, and oh my God, I could never be with my husband again." And I always was like, well, I still like my husband, and I don't want to do things that hurt him, which I was always going, I don't want to hurt him. I want it to be better. And that was all God continuing to work through me to say, this is who I brought to you. You had everything that your heart desired, because I placed it there. And you thought you could make a better way, because I look back now and I needed to grow. Like, there were things that God was working on with me. But as we know, when God's working on us, that's not always fun. And you definitely don't always like to look at yourself and deal with your own stuff. So it's much easier just to move on to something that might be a little bit easier. So I do believe that God creates somebody special for us, and that completes us in the sense that we just make each other so much stronger. And Father, I have to share, one of the coolest things probably out of this whole entire journey was when churches finally opened up after the COVID, Chris became Catholic. So we had been married remarried, but we would have actually have been together almost over 30 years. So after 30 years of us being together, all of our stuff, divorced, remarried, all of it, ultimately he became Catholic. So God works in mysterious ways, Father. He really does.
He sure does. Now, is just a phenomenal thing, and for the two of you to come to a whole different place at this stage in your life than you were when you were first married, and to know that it's a whole different sense of what marriage is, and to share that same root system of Catholicism, we'll say, but that sense of being connected by your faith is awfully powerful too, and what you seek to pass on to your children and now to your grandchildren. It really is a phenomenal story and quite a journey, but sometimes the journey takes us through the deserts before we can get to the mountaintop. And that's kind of the story of Lent that we enter into each year at this time also, that we've got to go with Christ and to face the darkness and face the demons, and then we go with him to catch a glimpse of a glory that is beyond us. And it is really, really a powerful thing.
Tracey,
well,
I want
say, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Finish your thought.
Okay, well, no, I was just going to say, I know the topic here, is forgiveness and the power of forgiveness. And I would just encourage anybody who doesn't believe that they can be forgiven or accept forgiveness, it's you can. And I just look back now to when I was standing in front of my ex-husband at the time, and he said, "I'd rather be dead than be married to you." And so if it can go from a place of that, where there was trust broken, so much hurt, to a place where we can be remarried and my husband become Catholic, and that we're living that faithful life. I think forgiveness is possible for anyone.
Well, I just want to comment, we're talking about forgiveness. We're talking about moving forward. But to move forward, we have to let go of those thoughts that, make us not feel very good. And some of those thoughts are the ones that we hold of ourselves, the guilt and the shame. And when we are attached to those, it's not serving us and it's not serving anyone around us. And as we talked about the process of forgiveness, it starts with letting go and abandoning it. But I know that those thoughts creep back in, those thoughts of guilt and shame. And so I'm just curious what your process of that is, because I'm sure that you have forgiven yourself, but then there's different layers and things keep surfacing. And I'm just curious what that process has been for you. Do you believe you have forgiven yourself? What does that look like, feel like in your life?
I do believe that I'm at a place where I have forgiven myself. But I will say that it took many years to do it. And I'm at a place now when those thoughts, because they do creep in, whether it's, you drive by the old house you used to live, or you think of, there's sometimes where I'm just sitting in a moment and a memory comes up of something awful that I did or said to Chris or to anybody, and the lies. And so things will constantly creep in about that, of regret, of things that I'm like, well, if none of this would have happened, we would be here. And I try so hard when those happen to just in that moment say, thank you, Jesus, for where we are today. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm a sinner, but I know that you love me and you have forgiven me and you have restored everything that I ever loved and valued back in those days, which was my children, my husband, my family, my faith. And I continue to get stronger every day in your word. I do know for me, within, the Catholic Church, it wasn't always that we read the Bible as much and were really in the word. And so I have found different opportunities now where I am in different Bible studies and study and just words of reflection. And I'm constantly always speaking those and thanking Jesus every day. And one of the things that I think I've learned through this journey is that we can talk to Jesus anytime. Like, it's where I think growing up, I kind of felt like, well, I have to go to church and I have to confess and I have to be forgiven and I have to say these specific prayers. I no longer feel that. I feel like God is with me and in me daily. So it's just for me now a constant praise towards him. So I'm just speaking all the time about the thankfulness that I feel about all of my blessings, and that had that sin of infidelity, adultery, sin, all of that not occurred in my marriage, I don't know where we'd be today. So I do believe that God turns all bad into good if we allow it. So I think that's just more of my mindset now, that I am a child of God and my Father is forgiving, just as I am with my children. I would never turn my back on my children. So I know that God would never turn his back on me. So it's just been the process, I think, of understanding that, knowing that, feeling his love has really helped me.
Well, what I love is that it takes responsibility on our part, but also maybe an awareness to take advantage of an opportunity through all these experiences whether it's good or bad, and to pull the lesson out, or whatever this is here to serve us, the purpose of it. And because of that, some of these experiences that we would not be asking for, that we're not prepared for, but that we have moved through, then we feel sometimes a calling to maybe step up and use our experience, our story, our testimony, for others. And I know that you have a calling right now in regards to helping others with their marriage.
I do. And we're kind of putting together for love of marriage, and we want there to be resources for people of all ages, all faiths. I think that's where we get caught up with so many people and just specifically saying possibly religion, when it's really, no, we all just love Jesus. We all love God. How do we come together and share our struggles so that definitely nobody that we love, we know, ever has to experience the pain and suffering that we did, that I did, that my family did. So definitely very passionate about it and love to share my story. And the cool thing is I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Definitely, you're not proud of your sin, but I don't feel the shame. I just want to share and help as many people as I can.
That's very inspiring, Tracey, because this way you're turning something in, that you perceive to be negative, but you're using it to impact people in a positive way. That's really cool. What would you say? I don't want you to speak for Chris, but what would you tell the listeners? How was Chris able to move through this and ultimately reconcile? Because there might be a listener out there that's in his position right now. And can you speak to that? Just what you have learned about each other as individuals, not in the sense of, the couple maybe, but as individuals, what have you come to learn more about Chris and respect about him? And then also, obviously, that's something that you ultimately love about him because it brought you back together.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is that, we all have a timetable, and patience is, I think, a virtue that we all are continuing to work on, because especially in the society we live in now, everything is, you get it right now. It's so quick. I want it now. Why do I have to wait on it? And in the process of healing and forgiveness, there's really not a timetable. And what I learned was, just because I, in the moment, said, well, I'm ready and you should forgive me, and here I am, I'm willing to work, he wasn't. And he had been hurt. And so it took me stepping back to think, wow, there's been years of hurt, and I can't expect him just next week to say, oh yeah, it's all great and let's move forward. I had to earn his trust. And in building trust, it also strengthened me, because I needed to learn some of my own virtues that I needed to work on. So through the process, I feel like God was working on both of us. And I showed up in the way that he needed me to show up, in the way he asked me to show up. There was no pushiness. There was no expectations of other than, I believe this is truly all in God's timing. So if I do believe that and I'm giving it to him, then I have to let him work on Chris also as he works on me. So I would just share with anybody that if you're the one that has hurt someone, then you have to let that other person heal in their own timing and in their own way, and just constantly pray for them. And I believe that Chris saw a change in me. So by him slowly seeing the change in me and building trust, that helped, for us to start being open to sharing and loving again and bringing our family back together.
In the Christian marriage ceremony, we talk about that the two shall become as one. And, that's a very beautiful ideal. And on some levels, a philosophical level, we believe that it is true that we become one, mind, body, and soul. And yet at the same time, we are always individuals. And you always balance what is ideal with what is real. You might remember the prophet Khalil Gibran, who said, like two trees that cannot grow in each other's shadows, a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, cannot do the same. They have to follow their own path. They have to grow at their own speed. They have to develop their own being. And they need that separateness to do so. Anyway, I want to wish you the best of luck as you are trying to launch a program to help couples, and especially husbands and wives who have been through difficult situations, to come to a better place in their lives. It sounds like you and Chris were meant for each other, that God did have a plan, that he did draw you together from the very beginning, even though there were times along the journey and times along the way that it didn't seem like that. And somehow the hand of God was present through that, and trying to draw your hand and his hand together to walk as one. And I just think it is such a phenomenal thing because of your experience and because of who Chris is, that the two of you are willing and able and in a place in your life to help people to go through those stages also, and to reach where you are, from romance and infatuation to parenting and companionship and now grandparenting and growing up together all along the way, and now getting at a point where you can commit once again to grow old together, and that the two can become as one. So again, I thank you and wish you the best of luck in this new venture. What a wonderful thing to do.
Tracey, I just have...
Thank you, Father, and I welcome all your prayers. Any prayers you can send our way, Father, I accept.
Yeah.
I have just one more question for you. You had mentioned, marriage is work. And I remember early in our marriage, we went to a retreat, and we were the youngest couple there. And majority of the couples were quite older. And they looked at us and said, well, why are you two here? And I thought, because we want a good marriage and we want to work on it now. But as Father said, it's not only just working on our marriage, it's also working on ourselves. And earlier in the conversation, you had mentioned that when you were kind of struggling and you were looking outside of your marriage, you really didn't have a strong foundation of who you were. And I just would love to ask you, after, this experience and you working on your marriage, but more importantly on yourself, how do you see yourself now?
Ooh, you saved the toughest question for last. Well, I do see myself as a child of God. I see myself as an incredible mother. I see myself now as an incredible wife. I see myself as a incredible friend. I'm following my heart and my spirit now, where God is leading me. And I don't have any fear of that God has an incredible plan for me. I just have to have the courage every day to step up and let him lead me. Where I think before I didn't have that courage, because I don't think I felt that I had an intimate relationship with him, like that I was really connected to him. And now I do. And I don't ignore any of the feelings that I'm receiving through my spirit to follow him and to do what he's asking me to do. So much more confident in who I am and who he is creating me to be. And then he continues to work on me every day. And now it's exciting to look within myself and see the growth. So.
Well, I think one of the things you forgot was an incredible sister. I don't know if the audience knows, but Tracey's my sister, and I've been able to really watch this journey and watch who she's, became from it because of the work that she's put in herself and her marriage. And I'm inspired, and I'm just so proud of you. And it takes courage to come on and have this type of conversation and be truthful and real and take responsibility for ourselves and our choices. But these conversations, I believe are going to cause somebody to possibly, look through a different lens at what this means. Instead of judgment, it's coming from compassion and awareness. And so I'm so thankful for your willingness to come on and share your story.
No, well, I'm very proud of you too, sister, and very blessed to call you my sister.
Tracey, maybe we could wrap up with this piece of advice that maybe you could impart some wisdom on our listeners. What one message of wisdom would you impart maybe on a couple that's newly married, and just looking back over everything that you and Chris have gone through, what advice would you if you had to give one or two pieces of advice, and I'm not saying specifically to any one thing, but just in general, what kind of a gold nugget could you offer up to somebody that would help them?
Number one, I would say pray together and be vulnerable with each other and very open and share your true feelings when you're in that moment of prayer, just sitting together quietly by yourself, and be open to share your hearts with that person, and the other spouse be willing to accept and hear and show your spouse grace and just constant communication no matter what. That would be mine.
Yeah, that's really important. I appreciate you saying that. Because, Father, you probably deal with this a lot when couples are coming to you and maybe they're not getting along, there's not much harmony in the marriage. And what type of advice maybe would you want to impart in that scenario?
I often ask couples to remember about what they were initially attracted to in one another. Usually it's a physical attraction. You see somebody and say, that's the one for me. And then as you get to know people, you become friends, and then you become good friends, and then you become best friends, and then you become soulmates, and you become life partners. And in that whole process of going deeper and deeper and deeper, you see something that is phenomenal, that works beyond the difficulties of the good times and the bad. And there are an awful lot of bad, an awful lot of tough times. Something as simple as when you become parents, you don't have time for anything else, and you often don't have time for one another. And I know that there are a lot of exits on this road of life, and as couples and as parents, sometimes we find easy exits to go off on, and we don't stay on the main path. But I want to just say that whether it's a young couple that's engaged now or a couple that's been married for 60 years, and I think I even had one 70th anniversary of marriage that I celebrated, it just, whatever stage we're in, I think we have to ask, is it possible to fall deeper in love and deeper into the beloved? And in the hearts of one another, can we discover that we're dwelling in the heart of God? The union between man and wife is not just between the two, but the two of you and God. And if we can keep coming back to that sense of where is God in this relationship, and as Tracey said so beautifully, if we pray together, we're going to find that anchor. We're going to find that sense of how we are united, not just in the two of us, mind, body, and soul, but the two of us in relationship to God in a spirituality that can overcome all things, so that we are reminded, perhaps in marriage as an institution better than anywhere else, that all things are possible with God, if God is the center. So I guess that's the advice that I keep coming back to, saying, let's find God in this relationship and see if it can carry us to a greater place.
Well, Tracey, thanks.
And just one last thing. Oh, sorry, Bob. Just one last thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that you and Kelly would concur with this, is be each other's best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're best friend with your spouse, you should be each other's best friends. Strive to be that. And I think you guys are an example of that. So I would just end with that.
Well, I definitely married up, and it's been a blessing. I know Kelly wants to say one last word here.
I just want to share, because I know we're talking about forgiveness, and, within a marriage, it's work, and we have to forgive ourselves and forgive our partners. But I remember one of my dearest friends sharing with me one time. He said, whatever my wife asks of me, I really can do it, and I can give it to her, and I want to do that for her. And I just thought it's so simple, but it causes you to think, am I choosing that? Am I doing that? Because we can do those things for one another. And so again, I just really appreciate you being on. And I think this was an incredible conversation just to continue and to really start thinking about, our choices and, our willingness to put the work in our own marriages.
Tracey, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I know your story is going to impact not only our listeners. I'm really excited to see what you do with your story going forward, and the amount of people that you can impact. There's no end to it. So keep going. And again, thank you for being open and sharing your heart and your story today. I know it was very inspiring, and I know our listeners are going to benefit from listening to this episode.
Thank you for having me. Love all you guys.
Okay. All right. Well, Father Don, another great episode today. Thank you for your words of wisdom always, and Kelly. And we look forward to seeing everyone on our next episode of Time for Forgiveness. Until then, have a blessed day.